Hello, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed speakers and our valued audience. Ewarabash and Masa al Khair to all participants from Iraq and Arab region. And good morning to those joining us from US. And good afternoon to our guests from Europe and UK. And Hayırlı akşamlar to our attendees from Turkey. We are gathering today to explore a topic that is both historically rooted and urgently relevant: the role of women in the political process in Republic of Turkiye during the AK party era. This conversation takes us, This conversation takes us back to mid-19th century, beginning with the 1856 Tanzimat format, which was the first moment when women's rights were formally mentioned in Turkey and in the political history of the country. We will reflect on the landmarks of 1934 legislations which granted Turkish women full suffrage, including the right to vote and run for parliament. While the foundation was laid nearly 2 centuries ago, the evolution of women's political participation remains timely subject in 2025. And this webinar is a part of a broader series of international discussions led by Turkish Studies Unit at Sbey Research Center, led by Dr. Kardo Rashid. And if you may, let me briefly introduce you to Sbey Research Center. Our center, established in 2023, we are an emerging policy and research hub in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and we are dedicated to evidence-based policy making and public discourse, of course, and advocacy. Our work rests on three co-pillars, which includes research, analysis, and advocacy, and public engagement. Today's agenda is structured as following. Let me go to the agenda. Like, you all have the agenda because before the webinar, we already shared the agenda, but I will also, recap the agenda. Today's agenda is structured as following. I will begin with the brief bio of our distinguished speakers, and each speaker will have 10 to 15 minutes for their presentations. I will present their topic. And we will move to the first round of the questions from the moderator, which is me. And finally, we will open the floor for a Q&A session with the audience. And of course, feel free to ask your questions in the chat box. I'll try my best to read them out loud during a Q&A session. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our speakers. Today, we were supposed to have 3 main speakers, which includes Tajali and Meryem İlayda Atlas and Professor Fatma Muge Gorcek. Unfortunately, we don't have Fatma with us. Because of technical problems, she's not just picking up. But I will start introducing our speakers by reading short biography of Muna Tajali. Muna is an associate professor, visiting scholar at Stanford University. She is Associate Professor of International Relations in Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, and currently she's serving as a visiting scholar at Stanford University Center of Democracy, Development and Rule of Law. Based in the United States, her research focused on gender and politics in Muslim-majority countries with a comparative lens on Iran, Afghanistan, and Turkey. She explores feminist movements, political representation, and institutionalization of women's rights in semi- and non-democratic settings. Her publications include Women's Political Representation in Iran and Turkey 2022, Electoral Politics Making Quotas Work for Women 2011, Women and Constitution in Muslim Context 2024. We also have Meryem İlayda Atlas. Meryem, she's academician, member of managing board of TRT.
I think that Fatma Muge Gorcek is also with us.
Oh, really?
You said that she's not here. She's just joined.
Oh,
she's with us.
Okay, that's good. Fatma, welcome. then yeah, I'll go back to reading the bios, okay? And we also have like Meryem İlayda Atlas. She's academician and member of like managing board of TRT, which is the Turkish Radio and Television Corporation. Meryem, she is a journalist and academic, currently pursuing PhD in political science at the Istanbul University, and she's also lecturer at Çankak. Sorry if I'm reading it wrong, maybe. Çankak, Çankak 18 University in Istanbul. She also, as I mentioned, serves as a board member of TRT TV channel, Turkey's national broadcaster. Her work emphasizes on gender dynamics in politics, and she is recognized as one of the few prominent female voices in both Turkish media and academic world, with a significant insight into the position of women in the political system. And last but not least, we have Fatma Muge Gorcek with us. She's a professor of sociology in University of Michigan. Fatma Muge Gorcek is a sociologist and professor of sociology in the University of Michigan. Her comparative work analysis intently to history, politics, gender, and strong emphasis on nationalism, religious movements, development, and collaborative violence in affecting minority communities. She is the author of Denial of Violence 2050, a landmark study on the persecution of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire and modern Turkey, which won the Mary Douglas Award for American Sociology Association. Thank you so much for being with us. Let's begin with our first presentation. Mona, over to you. You can start your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much to everyone being here. Thank you so much, dear Ahang, for your invitation and for organizing this. It's a great pleasure to be among all of you. And as well, I'm very much looking forward to having a very important discussion on women in politics in recent years in Turkey. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm hoping that I will be sharing the correct okay. All right. So yes, what I'm going to be presenting is maybe just a snippet of my own research on electoral politics and gender and politics in Turkey. And I guess just to start off with, the book that Ahang mentioned is my monograph that was the result of about a decade of research, and it was a comparative research. I started that research in 2009, and then the last time I did field work for that research was 2019. And so that was a comparative between Iran and Turkey. And as a feminist scholar, as someone who's interested in gender and politics, I was very much interested in bottom-up approaches. What I mean by that is I was really interested in women's own organizing and how women have been recognizing their own political agency and how they've been pushing to have a louder voice and a bigger presence within political decision-making of their context. And so from that research, I was able to recognize that not only is this a long-term demand, that women across the region, particularly within the context of Turkey, have been increasingly demanding greater political rights and political representation, but at the same time, they have been gotten very good at maneuvering the patriarchal structures, because we are dealing with extremely undemocratic patriarchal structures, and this is historical. None of this is new, and so there have been various opportunities and obstacles that women have been facing. So, for the purpose of this talk, I wanted to maybe just guide us around some of the key questions that I wanted to address, and some of those questions. I'm sorry, am I still sharing the correct screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yes, some of those is some of the intricacies of feminist resistance and electoral politics in Turkey. I was really interested in the opportunities and obstacles that have impacted women's political representation during the AKP era, which, as we know, is now more than 2 decades in power, from 2002 until today. And here, when I'm talking about women's political representation, it's really helpful for me to also make a distinction of what I mean. And political representation comes in various forms. The main two types is descriptive representation and substantive representation. By descriptive representation, we mean just women's numbers and positions of power. Are they there? Are they numerically present? And substantive representation refers to, are women actually acting on behalf of women? So the idea is that you need to have politics of presence for women to be in positions of power in order to see some women-friendly changes. And it's because it's assumed that you can't necessarily rely on your male colleagues to pass women-friendly legislation, because it does take a lived experience as well to be able to address some of women's concerns, like parental leave and so on and so forth. My research, particularly what I'm going to be presenting here, is predominantly on women's descriptive representation, while I will try to touch to some extent on substantive representation. So feel free to ask me questions on both. And then the other question I wanted to address is, how have they shifted throughout the past 2 decades? And what are some of the current feminist expectations and lessons learned? And I think it's important to keep in mind that sometimes I get this question, I don't think I will get it from this audience, is like, why should we even care about women's political participation and representation? And I think what's flawed with that question is that we assume that women's presence is not directly connected to democracy. Whereas in fact, we do know that if we talk about democratic politics, if we talk about pluralism, we talk about diversity of voices, women are at least half of any society. Therefore, they need to be present, even if we don't have democratic structures. And I think that's also part of the question, is that you cannot necessarily wait to have democracy before you have women. The two go hand in hand. And I think that we need to be very clear of that. And of course, women are significant for the democratization as well as justice, as well as development that we need. So I'm going to make this research based on the structure and agency arguments that have been quite significant. That have been quite significant in the sense that, to answer these questions, I consider the relationship between the various structures that are there and how have women as agents themselves been able to maneuver within them. And we do know that women have been resisting and maneuvering within undemocratic structures of their context to increase their political influence. This is nothing new. We are universally, unfortunately, living in very patriarchal structures. And that at the same time, there's been a lot of dynamism and pragmatism of women groups, and as well as the ruling parties. So a lot of this I go in depth within my book with regards to what do I mean by this maneuvering, and what are the various shifting contexts that allow women to make some significant gains while at the same time have reversals take place within their context. And I think that's particularly quite important, despite the fact that you're dealing with research that is that particularly women are quite central within, while at the same time the structures are sometimes willing to pay lip service to women's concerns and sometimes and sometimes not. I also wanted to address the key actors that I think is really significant when it comes to women's political representation. And I divide them into 3 dominant groups, and these are political parties and party elites. These are predominantly male political leadership. Unfortunately, it's still, women are extremely underrepresented when it comes to higher leadership echelons. So when we talk about political leadership, predominantly it's male leaders. Then you have women's rights groups, some of which identify as feminist ideology and some of which do not. While at the same time they're advocating for, let's say, gender justice or gender equality. And then the third group is the electorate. And I think the relationship between these 3 is actually quite co-constitutive, as they each influence one another. For instance, if women's rights groups have a particular interest, yes, of course they take it to political elites, but it really becomes costly for political elites to pay attention to women's demands when they know that the electorate has also been won over by the women's groups. And because they want to receive the vote, and because they want to stay in power, they are more willing to be responsive to women's demands, and vice versa as well, where the political elites also try to appeal to the electorate in order to pursue some of women's rights demands. And that's called instrumentalization of women's rights, where, again, as I said, it's really important for us to see where is it sincere, where is it not sincere, and that there's much dynamism. None of these groups are monoliths, and there is actually strategic interactions that take place between these groups where they each aim to pursue their own political interests for their own advocacy. And even those political interests may be shifting throughout time. So I think that's another thing that with my research with the AKP is that the leadership, while we still have, a particularly static political leadership, Recep Tayyip Erdogan being a key figure, even his political interest, particularly pertaining to women, has shifted throughout time. And I think what that means to us. So a quick trajectory of where we are, particularly with regards to women's descriptive representation within the parliament in Turkiye. Turkey is very unique in this sort of picture across the region because it is the first country in the region to have recognized women's political rights, which was as early as 1934. This is before France. This is before Switzerland. This is before some of the Western countries that we consider as models. And I think that in itself has been a major opportunity where women were just such early recognized as political actors. But then for decades, women's political representation was quite low. It was around 1% to 2%. Surprisingly, it was so low as well when you mostly had secular political parties in power and you mostly had token women in power. And then we see this notable increase taking place in correlation with the rise to power of the pro-religious conservative Justice and Development Party. And I think this is where it was a puzzle for many, particularly those of us in the West, where we're like, wait a minute, like, is this party having a feminist gender ideology? No, it's not. But nonetheless, it was very much welcoming to women's political representation more than its main secular opposition party. So I think that was a puzzle. And in fact, this was the puzzle that motivated my research because I was really interested to see how has this come about? What is the role of religion? What is the role of gender ideology? And that's why I decided to do a comparative research with Iran, a country that is a theocracy. So religion is predominantly a key factor in all of this. Currently, women compose 20% of the Turkish parliament. It's a record. It's never been this high, as you can see in this table. It is still considered below the global average of 26.7%. All of these numbers are quite abysmal, to be honest, where even globally, women are extremely underrepresented. If we wanted to talk about gender parity, it would be at least 40 to 50 years from now if we go at the same rate in order to even be close to gender parity. So I think these numbers, so yes, Turkiye is doing okay globally, but it's still very much below the global average. So some of the key opportunities and obstacles that women have been facing throughout the years. In terms of opportunities that I recognize in my research, perhaps one of the most important ones is that Turkey does benefit from having a legacy, a long history of organized institutions. Perhaps the most important one was political parties, that political parties have been able to be an institution. People are able to, from the grassroots at times, come together, form a party ideology, form a party platform. And then as well, it became really common for political parties to create women's branches. I've considered those to be really essential ways to mobilize women from the communities in order to even think about, politics at the higher levels. And so this has been really, really significant. And of course, when you have a multi-party system, the way Turkey does that at any particular election, you have at some point 14, sometimes 18, sometimes 12 political parties competing with one another. That in itself has created the what we call party competition to be a major opportunity where women can then pit parties against one another on who performs the best on behalf of women's descriptive representation, particularly. Because of this, we've also seen willing political elites. By that, I mean willing political elites who have been willing to be responsive to some of women's demands, particularly when it comes to nominating women, recruiting women to positions of power. Although, again, this is purely descriptive. So sometimes you could appoint a woman who is not necessarily a feminist or pro-women's rights, but nonetheless, symbolically and descriptively, it does make a difference because it does make your society more used to seeing women in positions of power. And the third main opportunity has been the support from the international community. This is where the EU integration process has been a major opportunity, particularly for the feminist movement at the grassroots level. Unfortunately, yes, it's been now more than a decade where those talks are not necessarily happening, but this was at some point a very important sort of tactic, particularly when it came to international support, when it came to the usage of international human rights documents. And you did have ruling AKP leaders, including Recep Tayyip Erdogan, be very responsive in his earlier years to EU integration process. And obviously now a lot of those are now put on a sideline. In terms of obstacles, I think most of you would already be aware of all of this, that we do have male-dominated political structures and a very prominent conservative gender ideology. As I said, AKP never adopted anything close to a gender egalitarian party ideology. It always maintained itself as a conservative party, although it was willing to be inclusive of women. So I think it's been moments where we see that conservative ideology get heightened and other times when it's downplayed based on what do we see these shifts. Also, unfortunately, we do have a lot of what I call ideological cleavages and baggage among the women themselves, particularly women across the grassroots. There has been a history of ideological conflicts, particularly around the headscarf ban between the secular women and the more conservative religious women. And this baggage has unfortunately led to somewhat of a weakening of a women's movement within Turkey, something that Iranian women in my comparative research have been able to find, that Iranian women are much better able to come together because they just don't have this like decades of really conflictual ideological battles between them. And then lastly, the political hegemony that we've been seeing particularly get pronounced within the last few years, which is the monetization of power into the hands of a select few and enabling of authoritarian control. So just to give you a little bit of examples of some of this, particularly from the women's movement perspective. So electoral competition or the contagion effect has been a really, really significant one. This is a poster that I really like because it's a play on words on the 2015 campaign for the parliament, where, as you can see, that Kadar, which is the feminist association on support of women candidates, they made this poster to be able to just say, hey, electorate, look at all of your party leadership and recognize which one is, responsive to women's demands in terms of descriptive representation and which one is not. And of course, the one party that does stand out is the pro-Kurdish HDP party at the time, which you have the two co-leaders, right, with between the two of them, whereas all the other ones are just they're completely deaf tone to women's particular demands when it comes to some of this. So these types of campaigns were really influential because it also allowed the electorate to start comparing parties with one another. That I remember at every round of elections that I was in Turkey, particularly for the parliamentary elections, much of the headlines of the newspapers would be, which party has nominated more women? Where are they? Where are the women? How are they ranked in the closed party list? This is a very significant accomplishment for women to be able to have, that you don't see this in many other contexts, including, let's say, in US, right? So this was a major one. Willing ruling elites has been also a very significant aspect. Obviously, Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself, particularly when he was mayor of Istanbul, he very much recognized the power of women, particularly women's power in voter recruitment, and he did open the door to them. He was quite welcoming. He did utilize the women's branch, the Kadın Kolları, in a really, really effective way. And in my interviews over and over again, particularly with members of Kadın Kolları, I often heard that many said, he is the one who made it legitimate for me to be participating in politics and so on and so forth. There's another organization that was created in 2013, which is called Kadam, that is very much closely allied with the AKP. And they've also been able to, over the years, really emphasize that if you need women in positions of power, this is in correlation with democracy, right? So they're saying, like, if there's women, then there's democracy. So these are at least talking points that the party has been able to push forward, even if they may not come sincere, but nonetheless, these are really important political acts. Obviously, when we're talking about willing political elites, this is also where we see the ideology of particular political parties come together. I think the feminist party ideology of the HDP during the 2015, and then of course its successor parties, has been quite significant in order to really recognize that there is a core group that wants to see radical change. This is the first political party in the Middle East to have officially declared a feminist party ideology, as well as adopting, for instance, a 10% LGBTQ quota. Although my research shows that none of their gender parity nor their 10% LGBTQ has been fully implemented, but nonetheless, just adding it onto a party ideology is obviously expressing a particular interest on behalf of some, rather than sidelining it. International human rights discourse has also been really, really significant. As I said, the discussions during the EU integration process has been good.
My apologies. We're running out of time. You're like just 2 minutes left. Okay.
Yes, 2 minutes. I will wrap up everything 2 minutes. Thank you. So yes, the one particular campaign was to demand headscarf women's access to the parliament, which, as we know, was one of those public spheres that women were not able to have access. And I remember some of these discussions, which I've published extensively on, where the use of the language of CEDA, or the Convention of Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, was used in order to grant women more access to this. And for instance, this is a picture of Fatma Bostan, one of the founders of AKP, who actually resigned from the party in order to run. And eventually we had the ban officially lifted in 2013, I'm sorry. And then 2015, we had 44% of the candidates be headscarf. Unfortunately, now we have been seeing more of that monopolization of power into the hands of the AKP. It did happen in steps. And, there were referendums that took place. I think all of us are familiar with sort of the trajectory of how that intensified over and over again. There was a lot of anxiety on behalf of the AKP leadership of the secular establishment. So they really felt justified in order to maintain the judiciary, the military, and so on and so forth within their own allies. The Gezi Park protest was considered one of the very significant turning points, particularly as far as the feminist movement is concerned. The 2016 coup attempt re-amplified those anxieties that the establishment had. 2018 was a change from a parliamentary to a presidential system that in effect allowed Erdogan to just transition from being a prime minister to the president for continuing on. And then as well attacks on other democratic institutions like media, like courts, as well as academia, right? Where we have universities and academic freedom be very much addressed. When it comes to women's issues, we've seen the implementation of a conservative gender ideology. There's been a priority over appeal to more conservative electorate over women's issues, and some have called that instrumentalization of women's rights. For instance, some examples is changing the name of Ministry of Women and Affairs to Ministry of Family and Social Affairs. We have seen implementation of pro-natalist policies, encouraging more women to just have more babies, which is aligned with other pro-natalist countries. The withdrawal of the Istanbul Convention was perhaps one of the biggest contentious issues. This occurred, and the AKP did this despite women from within the party very much opposing it, including the organization Kadam, as well as other major reversals of women's rights. So where are we today in terms of women in parliament and feminist resistance among the ideological conflict? Unfortunately, there is no active women's caucus in the parliament that allows cross-border collaboration among women. That I consider to be a major weakness. There was a time where women across political parties were really good with at least working with one another. NGOs such as Kadar have been seeking to bring women together. They've not been very successful because AKP women have been sort of, in a way, de facto banned from really engaging with other women. There's been a lot more emphasis placed on local elections. And as we saw last year, there was a major victory of the opposition. There was also a major victory for women. So out of the 11 new mayors, 10 were from the opposition. They were either from the CHP or the Dem political party. So to end with, I think the grassroots feminist resilience and transnational solidarity is really, really significant. These are just some of the names of the organizations. So I'm involved with Women Living Under Muslim Laws, which is one of the oldest transnational feminist solidarity networks that works across the region. And we do see that the authoritarian turn and the patriarchal ideology is not new. It's not just happening within Turkey. It's happening across the region. And these elites very much borrow from one another. So feminists need to come out of their silos, and women's rights groups need to come out of the silos and establish more of that linkage, particularly here of us, here in US. Are we seeing a patriarchal backlash? Very much so. We have been seeing it actually. So learning lessons from one another and engaging with one another. Thank you. And sorry I went over.
Well, thank you so much. That was very nice. Thank you for remarks, Mona. And now it's time for Dr. Meryem İlayda Atlas. You can start your presentation, and you also got 10 minutes to do your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and discuss some issues with you. And thank you very much for your invitation. I'm a journalist and academic. My academic career is coming a bit late because I have professionally worked journalist for years and years. I started as an editor, a reporter, and now I'm a board member of Turkish National Broadcaster, TRT, which is a very rare position for a woman. We have only 2 women appointed by the president after 18 years. And also in media, very shortly speaking, I can say that 70% of the managerial position, decision-making positions, maybe more than 70%, but this is my observation. But this is not only for Turkey. Well, I'm talking about the world. BBC announced a very rare position that a women editor is appointed for the first time. Some kind of wage gap is also still in a big problem in the media. Media is a very masculine area when it comes to the managerial and decision-making high positions. So I sometimes make fun of my office because it's all brown, it's very male, it's all masculine, and I'm a very colorful person. And when I go there, just in Ankara, it's just everyone is standing. It's just like I forget that I'm a woman because you're just forcing me to act like a male. And in all of these professional circles and all of the deputy managers and all of the general managers of TRT since the establishment from the Republican era, all of these kind of media affairs are reserved for males. And there are very little women because it's somehow it is accepted like that. And what are women doing? Women are mostly working in lower conditions, like editors, like assistants, which is not creating a risk or a potential threat for, not creating potential threats for men. So when you just become going on high and high, when I spent my 10 years with Kadem since its establishment. Now I'm still as a volunteer. Because of my toddler and my PhD and my position, I'm not, actively working for them. But all of these years, when you mentioned 2015, especially Kadem blocked the early marriage proposal in the assembly. I was very active at those years. So when you're talking about all of in your presentation, I just feel that you are talking about me because I am living an active practitioner, but please accept my apologies. When I am listening these kind of presentations, on one hand, I do appreciate how they comprehensively understood, take the picture. But on the other hand, as also an academic, and I wrote my dissertation about the Turkish feminist movements, their continuities and breaks since the Ottoman Empire. And then when I'm also living in it, I think that I read a lot and understood very well the feminist theory. I find some missing parts, some misunderstanding, misinterpretations based on our reality. So I don't want to be in a position to myself that we Turks resemble no one but ourselves, that you cannot understand an outsider. I'm not in a position like that. But it's maybe a kind of position like all of these ideologies, for example, as you mentioned, gender ideology has some assumptions, and it's all of the assumptions are including something and excluding some other things. Mm-hmm. So when you are conservative, when you are a pious woman, you are traditional, not accepted as a feminist. So most of the feminists in Turkiye are accepting me as a subordinated, patriarchal woman. So I'm working from 19 years old, and it's my family life. I have a professional life, and this and that doesn't matter. So I respect a lot, but in Turkiye, I find the feminist movement, and I also part of my dissertation is said that a bit very unrealistic, too much elitist, because it's rooted from the leftist movement. And it is coming from a kind of different secular ideology. And think about that 70% of the women living in here are conservative, pious women. So you are just creating an elite ideology, which is also very much fed and very much organized, and it's shaped by the Western universal values, Western ideologies. But all of these European values sometimes are not fitting to the realities of the women here in Turkey, but it doesn't mean that they are against women or they are just harmful for women. So this is some kind of dilemma at every aspect of my life since the age of 15, when I had a pet headscarf, when I just veiled myself. I am living this, some assumptions are created for European values. I do respect them, but they are not explanatory for my reality. I should say that. So there are some kinds of missing. I've had no time to correct all of them, but if you have time, Fatma Hocam, Mona, anyone, you can be my guest in Ankara, Istanbul, anywhere. We can have talk about it. I'm open to talk, but I have to say this. Feminists become so angry with me when I say this. But feminist ideology, as Shirin Tekeli states, that it is coming from leftist ideology. So I'm not leftist. My family is conservative. I am a pious life. I'm a pious Muslim. So in this point, based on the Wallace Scott's understanding of feminism, if you want to be structure a feminist ideology, you don't have to always fight the idea of the state, family, some conservative values, but you can stay yourself inside. You can be an insider and still make a lobby on behalf of women. So this is a kind of different reality. Of course, in our own reality, we have lots to criticize, but the framing out is sometimes becomes not fitting with our reality. So my perception will be talking about, as we have agreed before, talking about a kind of feminist movements from Ottoman Empire and to the Republican era. But Mona's presentation was very tasty. She completely distracted my presentation, so I want to talk about some other issues. if you forgive me, because it was a kind of academic presentation. But I want to talk about some issues on women very shortly. Just it came to my mind while you were speaking. Especially the political participation among women in Turkey is very high. It's a very great access. And as you said, Mona said, political party elites, most of them are male, and all of the political party structures are masculine environment. So we have to, at the very beginning, we have to ask the question, do we really need women candidates under this environment? It's a provocative question, of course. Of course, we have the women candidates, and I don't want to, classify women. These women are working for women. These women are not. But sometimes it is turning like that. So there are quotas or some lists are being prepared by the party elites. Most of them are males. They put women there. But most of time they choose good listeners, because men very much like women as good listeners. If you are a woman, and if you even have a very good career, very perfect CV, but you have to act in a low profile position when you are with them, and if a good listener is always be taken. So sometimes they pick up women, sometimes they hate. Most of the time in Turkey, the most hated in political for the conservative political elites, most hated women is Özlem Zengin, who is wearing a headscarf, who is also a woman activist. She is both hated by the seculars and both hated by the conservative males. I am also a part of, I'm also, a smaller actor, and I'm also have a position in the state. So I don't have tweet or fight with other people, but I see that professional pious women, professional veiled women are the object of the hate of the both seculars and conservative males. It's a long story, but to put it short, I would say that because none of them is ready to welcome professionally exercise of power by women who think that they are subordinate, they are rural, they are, somehow in a kind of inferior position, and you are in a managerial position, and you fight with them, you fight with CHP people, you fight with other people, you fight with conservative males. None of the parts are not yet ready for this. And of course, I can say that against all of these authoritarian stories, I think that political participation for women is very much started with welfare party in Turkey. All of the grassroots women, rural women, women living in disadvantaged areas are become a part of the politics which I find it very democratic. And one of the success of AK Party is to also put all of these girls and women into universities and schools by opening university in many other cities, because otherwise families are not sending their daughters to big cities, to Ankara, to Istanbul, to go to universities, but they do trust for the state universities. Most of them, they don't have money to pay for their education in other cities. So it's also, I find it very, very democratic. For my father, for example, if there was not religious high schools in Turkey, not for me, but for my elder sisters, maybe he won't send them to schools and they will not go and have education. So I don't recognize or I don't approve this kind of concerns, but I do understand them sociologically. So if you are a ruling party, you have to consider the problem of the most of the elite structures, secular understanding and feminist movements is creating some kind of typos, creating some kind of thinking in a very totalistic mentality and not recognizing the real concerns of the real people. So they are very disconnected from the what people say.
Yeah,
so in education, there is a huge success.
Yeah, sorry, but I think 1 minute left from your time.
Really?
Yeah.
I have just started. Okay.
Okay.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
I enjoy listening.
I want to say something, three points. One point is about education. A number of statistics. It's now Turkey less than 1%, less than 1% is all of the girls are for girls schooling. Now there's a great achievement for the literacy of the population. And also in higher education, the number of the women going to higher education universities more than male students since 2021 for the first time in the history of the Republic. I want to say 2-3 words about Istanbul Convention, which is I am one of the defenders that Turkey should not exit from Istanbul Convention, but it's about a very story that a very good story to understand the reality of the Turkish politics, because it's about domestic violence, and about domestic violence in Turkey, there's a great will about the ruling party that nobody is talking about, that women should face with domestic violence. But when we come to understanding, it's very easy when it's about the women issues, it's very easy to make it a negative propaganda. It's always a weak point of the AK Party. The ruling party could not explain itself to the world, to the people. So the propaganda about Istanbul Convention was the convention was letting gay marriages could happen. And, how come a country's legal system could be changed by signing a convention is another story. But it really worked. I followed the campaign very closely. And when we go to a village with PMs, when they are visiting, I'm sometimes following them in order to have, as a journalist. And in very remote areas, in villages, May was talking about that. When are we leaving from this convention? Istanbul Convention became a scapegoat for everything against family, against all of our values and this and that. At the same time, Croatia made a correction in the convention in order to make it happen, make it clear. They said that in our legal system, the family is only constituted from men and women. That's it. Turkey could do that, but it was the discussion was not about convention, and the discussion became in a very unhealthy environment, because we have on one hand seculars, and we are fighting with secular zealotry in Turkey. They are very rigid, in a very totalistic mentality. Most of them are self-hating, and they just find everything about the people and the public, their concerns, inferior. And on the other hand, we have religious bigotry, which is finding everything as scapegoat for women and family. Family issues are understood as women issues still in Turkey, and that's why now we have concerns, demographic concerns, very correct concerns. But if you just frame out everything about family on women and you just don't make a healthy conversation, a healthy discussion on it, then women, I just married at the age of 34. So before that, women, more young conservative women think that, well, after marriage, life will end. So this is not about our legal, last word, this is not about our legal system. On paper, everything is perfect because we have European adjustment process. We have very good rhetoric. We have all kind of regular amendments and adjustments, on paper legal codes and everything. We have a very powerful panel code, but on paper, on legal code, we have fine. But on our mentalities, we have still this monosol that for decades fighting with each other on secular and religious cycles for nothing, which is consuming our energy, which one side is not open, not understanding the changing society, the changing mentality of women, the religious bigotry. The other side is stigmatizing and stempling all of these women as not feminist, as patriarchal, this and that, and saying inferior. So we cannot come and find. So some other people, Yeniden Refah, again Refah Welfare Party, used the Istanbul Convention issue in a very perfect, successful political propaganda to make a grassroots movement for their own very conservative, rigid agenda. So if we want to talk about it, we can talk in Q&A session. This is very disorganized, but this is because of Mona. This is not, I had a presentation, but it's all Mona's fault. I'm sorry.
No, thank you so much. I'm really happy that you guys, you have a common ground, that you were like kind of connecting both presentations together, and it's time to hear from Professor Fatma Muge Gorcek. Thank you so much for being so patient, Professor, and it's your time. You have 10 minutes to explain your presentation, and later on we will find another chance to discuss and to go to the questions part.
Thank you so much, and thank you also to Mona and Meryem for setting the stage up. Going with the third after Meryem, one talked about the history, the other about the experience. So there isn't much left for me, except to sort of maybe just give you a sociological analysis of the sort of the women's sort of participation in the public sphere. Going forward. So I rightfully, when you look at the history, at least when I look at Ottoman history, the way I approach the changes that lead to sort of eventual secularization and such, with the adoption of Western European modernity from 1789, when Selim III comes, to rule onward, as they systematically westernize. Before that, for example, I have in 1721, I have a book on the embassy of 28 Şehir to Paris, and there, for example, he says in Paris, more people than Istanbul, because he says women are very active in the public sphere. So you see them all over walking alongside men. And that is why there's sort of, it appears more crowded. So you get a sense of, women's and how with Western European modernity, women start to participate in the public sphere much more than before. And then these, of course, continue with 1839, 56, and 76, where the attempts are to bring in, of course, especially the non-Muslim minoritized peoples into the Ottoman body politic. But, of course, unfortunately, it doesn't work. and also bringing women into the public sphere is very similar, because women also have been minoritized in Turkey like other ethnic religious minorities. So that is, I mean, how one could, how I approach women. So when you look at the initial participation of women in the public sphere, you realize that it originally starts by the daughters or wives or mothers of the Ottoman sultans through building of lots of mosques and fountains and other public goods. I mean, that is what they focus on providing. And they serve as the model that then sort of extends to the sort of ruling elite, let's say, in Istanbul, or so elite families on the one side, elite Muslim families on the one side, and also elite non-Muslim families on the other. So the first sort of feminists or people interested in women's rights are actually minority women, like after the Western model, naturally, that people like Melisa Bilal and Lerna Ekmekçioğlu, for example, have demonstrated in the case of Armenian women. But of course, this is the time when there is a very important nationalist turn as well, eventually. So what that leads to is that most of the sort of women in the public sphere that lead these sort of activities, then because of the persecution against minorities, leads eventually to urban, what is later turned as sort of white Turkish upper middle class women who oversee these activities. Therefore, the sort of women's movement that starts after the Western model, pretty much it stays limited to urban women of a certain education and a certain class. And that is, of course, problematic. That is what Zeynep Yeşimarat and others call state feminism. So this is the kind of feminism one gets, under the sort of tutelage of the state, not independently developing in civil society the way it did in the West. So that is a major difference. And initially, there are people, I think it's Nezih Muhittin and others, who want to establish a women's party. But after the transition to the Turkish Republic, CHP, the major Republican People's Party, that was the only party during the one-party system to then become the opposition party later on, is, leading when the women apply and say we want to have our own party in the Turkish Republic, they say no, you join the women's branch of the Republican People's Party. So in a way, that is how women are sort of contained in the public sphere, is through the agency only given to them in political parties and not elsewhere. And then what happens is that with time, there are attempts, for a women's movement to develop. And I was, of course, in Turkey at the time as a student. And what became, of course, extremely polarizing at that juncture was the headscarf issue. So I sort of wrote an article on to veil or not to veil. I mean, why is it that this had become such an important issue? I think, as Meryem also alluded to, the secular religious divide in Turkey of Western European modernity leads secular feminists to sort of act and think of the women's movement only of their own. And likewise, conservative women also want to only focus on their own participation and not the others. So it was interesting. Naranç Ataman, who is a psychologist sort of in Turkey, and I did a study in 2005 because there were arguments at the time from secular women employed in the state bureaucracy that they had been reduced in number after AKP came to power. So that was, and then there were others saying, well, no, is this the case or not? So I said to Naranç, why don't we interview women in the state bureaucracy to get a sense of what they think is happening among these. So what we found out were two things. First, there wasn't actually a reduction in the number of women, as let's say the secularists attested. Instead, there was somewhat sort of marginalization of the positions of those secular women, maybe in the bureaucracy, but they were accompanied by women appointed by Erdogan and others, but on personal connections. It wasn't a professional connection. This seems to be the major difference between the secular feminist, discrimination and the conservative, discrimination against women later on during AK Party times. So it appeared as if there were less women, and I said the appointment. So what I did was, as a consequence, I gave a talk about this because I went and visited sort of women's people in charge of women's issues in not only CHP at the time, but also AKP to get a sense of what was going on. And I had a very hard time to have access to AKP. Fatma Hanım was then, who later became minister, was then the head of the Women's Kadın Kolları Başkanı. And after meeting with both, I gave a talk. I said, unless the secular women in Turkey take ownership of the problems of conservative women, or conservative women also take on the issues facing secular women, we will not be able to have a united women's movement in Turkey. I said this, and there was an uproar in this hotel room, hotel hall with the secular feminists sort of going after me and saying, "What's wrong with you? Have you become a member of AKP?" And I'm saying, "Wait a minute, what are you talking about? It's neither here nor the other." But nevertheless, I was very taken by that because I still insist to this day, you cannot let either conservative women fight on their own because it's this division within the women's movement that is stopping the women's movement from developing the infrastructure, the social infrastructure in the professional sphere, this professional infrastructure that goes beyond these conservative appointments based on who you know, which family you depend on, and who could be loyal to you and all that. I think it is that transition that needs to take place going forward. Of course, in this sort of transition and discussion, and I will end with this, it's important to note that DEP, HDP, and others have provided with Öcalan's, especially Confederate formulation, a very significant role for women, an equal role for women from the upstart, leading to this joint presidencies, gender presidencies. And what's, I think, very important in terms of Turkish women, again, that's another divide we have. polarization between Kurds and Turks, where the Kurds are also othered, and Kurdish women probably othered even more with it. How do we then get beyond that in a way by including HDP and others in the Turkish body politic, with a lot of trouble since half of the people are in prison all the time throughout? I mean, how Kurds continue to try to exist and participate in the public sphere in Turkey is sort of very difficult to watch because it entails a lot of violence. But there too, I think ethnically Turkish women, be they secular or religious, do not take into account and also, support Kurdish women either. Kurdish women who live in society either. So we have to be able to overcome that divide as well. And that could only happen if we can bring all these different, unfortunately, fractured women's movements along religion on the one side into secular versus conservative zealotry. And also, of course, the ethnic zealotry that comes from Turkish versus Kurdish ones. And these are both going to be extremely important going forward because of course, the Kurdish opening and such. And we will see, I think women could play a very significant role there if they can collect and unite across these divides. And I'll leave it at that, and I can,
Thank you so much. And I think we have only 1 minute left from your time.
I'm done.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. I mean, I really enjoyed your presentation, and you all. Thank you so much, ladies. Now we will move to another part of the webinar, which is me asking questions. I will start from Muna. Muna, I'll go back to you, and I have a question for you. Have rulers, I mean, the Turkish rulers, parties, policies really helped women gain power in politics, or are they mostly just for show? For example, the three of you mentioned very great points that we have the great data. We have, for example, the rise in the political participation of women. But does the policies that this parties implement are really helping women go to the power and have a real political participation, or this is just a show?
Thank you. Very, very good question. And thank you as well. Okay. Thank you so much to Meryem and as well as to Fatma Janam for very, very rich conversation. I'm so glad that my talk was able to encourage Meryem to shift her talk, and so I think that's the whole purpose of these webinars. So yes, I think you gave your question actually allows me to maybe elaborate a little bit more, or maybe repeat some of what I already mentioned. It's quite complex. It's quite complicated. So when I look at all of the various political parties, perhaps the two parties that were the most willing, and those are the two that I also demonstrated in my talk, was the AK Party as well as the pro-Kurdish party. And what I mean by that is, yes, Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself, he played a key role in not only fostering women's political mobilization, women's politicization. As I said, I mean, interview after interview, a lot of women did directly credit him. Definitely, it all started with Refah as well. So the predecessor party. However, when it comes to reaching positions of influence, it was always limited. It's always been limited within the political structure. And I think a lot of that is just foundationally, it's been male-dominated political spheres. And it's completely correct to say that as soon as you had a very outspoken, important female figure, either she herself felt like she was not welcomed to be in that space, so sometimes they would resign, or that they would not have a chance to run again. And I think this is someone who does gender and politics, not just in the Middle East, but also here in the West. This is exactly the same thing. I mean, U.S. politics, as soon as you don't toe the party line to some extent, you will not be able to be successful because of various things. So, however, I do want to also add this this nuance that when it comes to, I mean, the majority of the women within the Turkish parliament are from the AKP. Numerically, they are the most. I think just because of the quotas of the pro-Kurdish parties, then you also have a bigger proportion of them. But numerically, majority of the women are from the AKP. And then when I asked about this, and of course the issue of gender quotas always comes up, and I'm a scholar of gender quotas, having studied them decades earlier. And my first book is on gender quotas. Women of Kadın Kolları would say that we have informal gender quotas, and what that meant was that at the time of putting the party list together, there were really important sort of movers and shakers within the party, particularly women, who would say, hey, make sure these people are now in. And this is somewhat of a phenomenon of the past last decade or so. This was not always so. So I think that in itself has been an important change. This is far from the discussions that were happening at the CHP party. Women just had a much harder time struggling to get through. Even the informal quotas always fell short, or women were just listed towards the bottom of the list. So then they had a much harder time coming in. And I think those dynamics are quite significant. And I know hopefully I'll get to speak a little bit more, but I think the way Fatma just ended her talk was very much on point in terms of the polarizations that are happening between the two different groups. And I think these polarizations are really intense. But I do want to add the small nuance that we have had coalitions take place across the ideological spectrum. I remember my own research when I was covering this. There have been important, including on the headscarf ban. That was one of those moments where finally 2011, 2012, 2013, you did have like an organization like Kadar finally recognize, say, oh my God, we've been missing this large section of the Turkish population. We need to be more inclusive of the headscarf. And that was a major success. We were hopeful this was going to last, but unfortunately it didn't last. So I think that's why we have the weaknesses in the women's movement that we have. And that's why I made the comparison to Iran, that in fact, Iranian women have been able to come together because they have the one common enemy, which has been the state, whereas in the Turkish context, it's been so, some of that ideological battles is just very, very complex and very historical.
Thank you so much, Mona. I will go back to Fatma. Fatma, you mentioned, I mean, like from the last point of Mona, you mentioned about the polarization of women, and like we have conservative women who see like see feminism through the eyes of scholarism, and just, in your opinion, does that affect the political participation of women? Like, for example, the women being active in the political landscape and like affecting the whole system to the good of the women of the Turkiye. Does that affect, and to which extent is it effective, if it is?
I mean, the body politic and the political structure varies a lot. I early on taught a course called Women and Islam here in the United States, because people had so many misconceptions, as Meryem said, about women having no agency in the Middle East, because they didn't appear, according to Western European modernity standards, as active in the public sphere. But nevertheless, as we all know, women are as strong, if not stronger than men in the Middle East, but mostly in the context of the private sphere, over which they usually have control in raising the children and such. So in the context of the family, probably, one could say. But that, of course, sort of changes because of the way in the Women and Islam course, I sort of looked at women in Egypt, in sort of North Africa, in Saudi Arabia, in Iran, in Turkey, so that we could see how they were located differently in all. And that is when I realized how much presence in the public sphere is used as an sort of way to assess women's participation. And what, of course, Meryem was talking about is that there is a lot of variation between theory and praxis, in the sense that there is a lot of progressive attempts, both under let's say, pre-AKP secular context, and of course also with AKP and context as well. But that has sort of continued. Why do you not see as much? I mean, from what I read within the context of AKP, women definitely are a public presence, a political presence in the parliament, but nevertheless, especially, I have great respect for Özlem Zengin and others, who are fighting the fight, but nevertheless, they are not, I think, able to make a change in the party or in the Turkish sphere in general, because there isn't the necessary infrastructure that needs to be in place, both in all parties, for women to rise to positions of power. And it's in this context that the Kurdish women's movement could provide an example for the Turkish women, secular and conservative, to follow, in the sense that appointing joint leaders, men and women, really changes the dynamic, because women then have access to knowledge as they go up the scale, and they do not become marginalized, as Meryem was saying, into these sort of secretarial, which is like how it also happened in the women's movement in the US. I mean, this is what happens with everyone, all minoritized people, including women, is that they cannot penetrate positions of power. People argue, at least because I work on sort of harassment issues and such here, scholars argue that you have to have at least 30% women in any organization. That's the threshold by which what happens is that if there are less than 30% of women in any organization, women's issues are always seen as individual issues, and therefore they are tackled individually. When women are more than 30%, their issues become collective issues. And because they become collective issues, then they are able to rise to positions of power to sort of tackle those issues. And that is how they become significant publicly. And that is how you can sort of translate theory into praxis as well. So for that reason, I think we all need to watch, even more carefully study Kurdish women's, participation in a confederate position, especially in these days when we have a Kurdish opening of sorts. I mean, that would be very important for women to unite and maybe lead that transformation, because I do not see others taking any action within the party structures. But then again, we don't know what happens inside closed doors in the parliament. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Like, Dr. Meryem, I have another question for you. Since you're a woman who goes a chair in the system and you're like evolved inside the system, which is pretty important. My question is to you is, like AKP got 50 female MPs, and they only have a female minister. So the question remains on the equation of gender and power. So they have 50 MPs and they only got a one female minister. So what does this say about the party's view on gender and power? Sorry, my question was for Meryem, Professor, not
Meryem.
Yeah.
The question was for me, but you didn't mention that.
Sorry, like Meryem, my question is, I said like AKP got 50 female members of parliament. but in the same time, in the Recep Tayyip Erdogan's government's cabinet, they got only one female minister, which is the Minister of Social Affairs, I think so. So what does this say about the view of the party on gender and power? They give voice to the parliament, but they give them, I mean, low voice in the cabinet.
It's not only in the it's not in the politics, but in everywhere. There are some positions, some issues reserved for women. Family of ministry is reserved for women for like almost 100 years. You know, there are some cabinets with no ministers, but women are always in charge of women or family affairs. And apart from that, we never ever had a Ministry of Justice as women, Minister of Justice as women. So I think that will be very great if we just have in Turkey a women minister. So it's a kind of understanding, as I said, that everybody is agreed on women empowerment, more quotas about women, and as I know, certainly because also academy is working for that. In AK Party candidate lists, they don't write women at bottom. They write, there have to be always 3 women, and they write it at the top. So otherwise, the president himself is just canceling it and putting them on the table. So there are lots of efforts. These are all appreciated, but mentalities are not changed quickly. So if you just put women, you push women, you put them on the first list, but the mentality is that there are, as I told, there are some areas reserved for women to talk. So when you just go to economics, hard politics, international relations, trade, all of these issues, so these areas are not reserved for women. If you are speaking, and it's a trap for women as well. So it's easy to go into these details, and you are just appointed a position as a woman, and it's easily you can fall into this trap, talking about women issues, and you quickly become the flower on the table. I'm sorry. And this is what is also most of the time expected, because most of the time women issues are understood as dangerous, inoffensive. So if you become very critical, you become very demanding, in the parliament, you just voice up for women. It's still about women issues. You're talking, you're criticizing the party, you can be accepted. But what about hardcore issues? What about hiring positions, the real positions? And what about talking about the private property of women? Women are holding 8% of the private property in the world, and in Turkey the percentage is 12%. And you know that we have equal rights according to our code, a civic code, and it says that when parents die, that it's equal share. But how come women end up holding the 12% of all of the property? So these are real issues. Somehow, this can be a criticism to ourselves. Going into details of women liberation, women empowerment, gender ideology, lifestyle issues, secularism, this and that, we are missing a huge issue of economics, international relations. All of these hardcore issues are still male issues. And most of the women, I don't want to make a generalization, and of course nobody has a kind of statistics, but this is my understanding, humble understanding. Most of the women dealing with men in all of these issues are completely in the understanding of male mentality. They are somehow against women. So it's not, if we are talking about numbers, this is decisive. If we're talking about quotas, sometimes it's also decisive. And also, if you're talking about too much women liberation, empowerment, putting this and that, it is also sometimes it is decisive. So we have to put and change. We have to take it out. Women issues are becoming a chapter of the textbooks in sociology, in international relations, in economics. So here, let's. Sometimes they invite me to speak for some lectures. So the lecture is, it's about international relations, this and that, blah, blah. And then let's talk about gender here. Let's talk about gender in economics. Let's talk about gender in history. But in history, women lived, they died, they were most of the time half of the population. So how can you just think about them as a spatial, menu for them, for women? So this is decisive. This is what you're saying, that there are lots of PMs in the parliament, and they are supported, they are pushed to be candidates, but the system, the environment, the entourage by male is not letting them to be active agencies. In Turkey, somehow in conservative circles, feminism is it's like it's first wave feminism, like actors, of course, being candidate, elected, and going to elections and being elected, there's no problem with that. And also the women election behavior is very interesting. They are very well aware of what's going on. That's why parties are somehow afraid of the women electors, not to make them angry. But it's not turning to the decision maker, the game changer, the game maker. The game makers are still males. That's why you are welcomed or not welcomed in the extent of at the borders of the politics, at the extent of the male players. This is my understanding.
If I may just add one thing to what Meryem said, when we contacted the women in the state bureaucracy, the top level women, regardless of whether they were secular or conservative, when we asked them what they thought about supporting other women, positive discrimination, would they engage, or did they engage in gender conscious behavior and positive discrimination, regardless of whether they were secular or conservative, they just said, no, we will not do that. We will be objective, which to me was very interesting, that there is no gender consciousness, which is what we need for the theories to basically go into praxis. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, Professor. I see some hands raised, and we have some questions in the chat box. So now it's time to open the Q&A session. For the questions, you may raise your hands and address the question, say the question and address the person that you want to ask the question, and of course introduce yourself. So I will start with Kawthar Al-Fatahi. Kawthar, thank you so much for being here. You can open your mic and you can ask your question.
Thank you. Hello, I'm very happy to see you here today as a powerful woman leading this important conversation. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. Well, the presence of women in politics isn't only about increasing numbers, it's about challenging system of power, ensuring justice and transforming leadership. In Turkey, I have a question, but before asking my question, I just want to emphasize some point that the good presenter shows here for us. In Turkey, women won the right to vote in 1930s, I think. However, under the AKP era, while some symbolic progress has been made, deeper structural barriers remain. And the rise of conservative gender ideology has limited women's space in politics and public life, I think. Yes, yet groups like Women Platform for Equality, if I'm right with the name, or Association for Supporting Women Candidates, have shown impressive resistance, pushing for equality and representation. In Iran, also because I'm a Kurdish woman from Iran, I want to add something also about Iran. Despite the legal and political barriers there, women have remained central to civil society and protest movements, from 1979 revolution to the recent Jinnah's uprising, which was started among Kurdish civil society. Their resilience reflects a growing regional feminist wave that demands real change. The presentation today and the slide that you show especially emphasizes on grassroots feminist resilience and transnational solidarity, reminds us of the power of collective action. Besides this, my question is, it's don't matter which one of the speakers wants to answer this question. It's totally up to them. It's about this, that do you think that gender quotas are enough to ensure real empowerment for women? As Meryem mentioned, I know it needs mental acceptance as well as, but did you think deeper structural change in politic culture still needed? I think it's a important question, just not a question to be answered only in a webinar, but to think about it, because it's kind of a way to figure out the problem that we talked today. Thank you for the time.
So the question was for me, as far as I understood, and the deep cultural change is needed. Of course, this is exactly what I'm talking about. We still need perceptions. We don't need to change legal codes. We don't need to change more adjustment process from the European Union membership, this and that. You know, we don't need European values as well. We have to need to look at ourselves, and in order to create a valuable position for women, because both the cultural capitalism and the traditional patriarchy is devaluing women very much. One of them is making slaves to the consumption and from aesthetics, and young girls are just trying to seeking for acknowledgement in the eyes of men when they first enter to the area. And also we have very hardship like between young girls and senior women like me, not old but still professional but working age. But I see that when I hire some very young girls for the first time to the job, I see that these people are not open to hear and listen from me. They just want to take the acknowledge and the approval from men. This is very cultural thing. This is something they learned in their families. So women managers' approval is nothing for them. They need male, so they want abi, you know, abicilik, they like it very much. So this is very cultural, and this is completely devaluing women. And when they come to at my age, when they come to 30, 35, when they got married, they have children, they face the real life, because this culture and all of the capitalist culture is against women and mothers and raising children, because they tell you to go out, to be beautiful, to spend and this and that. They completely feel the pressure on both sides, the family work balance, and how they look after themselves. They have some needs and this and that. So they just face with the real life with no clue, no expression, no experience transfer, and this and that. This is what I tried, and I sometimes manipulated with young ladies like 23, 24 as an old woman when I'm 35 years old. You know, this is what they want to think, but they could not survive in media sector after 4 or 5 years later, and I'm still there. You know, and being old or young is a very huge trap for women. On the other hand, women are devalued by traditional values, women's voice. So the public era in our country and in most of the Middle Eastern countries are very much male dominated. Sometimes I see that women are accepted this as something normal, unchanging. So most of the time, even the living rooms are reserved for males, and women are with children are living in the kitchen. So this is something very, very cultural, but it has a reflection. So we cannot say that this is their private area and this is nothing to do reflection on the public. They have reflection. And when you go to the office, when you go to the plaza, and you still do not feel yourself as the owner of this place. Sometimes when I have an assistance of a male assistant, sometimes people offer their business card first to them because they think that I am the assistant and she is the boss. So, and also it's very, I'm sorry if it won't take long, but I want to share one of my memory with a German journalist. It's very, sorry. So she came to me and we wanted to talk about the freedom of press in Turkey. It's a very, chaotic subject. And I talk a lot, and I insisted her that please write everything correct what I told you, because it's not an easy subject, freedom of press. He got taken all of this, wrote the article. She mentioned everything as I mentioned, nothing wrong. But two things, it's very strange, because I was in a managerial position and I was sitting in a different room where everyone is working in the open area, which I find it very inhumane. It's another story, but I have a separate room. And my room is on the northern side of the building, so it's very cold. I always have to put something cold during the summertime. It's always very cold. All of the air conditioning is coming, and I have to put something on. And she wrote me, the German emancipated journalist wrote about me that she secluded herself from the rest of the fashionable women working in the office, because all of the women are unveiled. They are working in this, because it's a huge company. Most of them are like modernized, quote unquote, women. She couldn't, understand it. How come? It's because I'm a manager. I have a separate room, and she thought that because I am a Muslim pious woman, I am separating myself from the other people. And she said that she was wearing thick clothes when it's 25 degrees outside. So because I want to cover myself, even I'm outside. So this is a very, very misunderstanding of the Europeans when they come to our countries. So the reference will be us, and we have to first notice what we are living through. So if you just go to the public area as treating it is not normative, it's objective, it's homogeneous, it's a huge lie. It's most of the time white male mentality and dominated with white privilege, and which the industrial city areas are mostly organized with this white privilege male understanding, which we all taken them without changing anything. And women, especially pious women, are blocked, and twice they blocked twice, because of they also have to fight with their tradition. They have to sit in the kitchen in their families and all of not in the living room. And one last thing, in Turkey, this is something I fight with it. I don't hate it, but I fight with it. In the mosques, women reserved a very small area, and they have to live all of with children in their so when I go to pray, I have to deal with all of the children around me in 1/3 of the place reserved for male, while male freely making peacefully making their prayers. So this is, if we don't change this mentality, so we cannot go over and in public we are equal, normative, and this and that.
Thank you.
Can I just add something very, very briefly as well to Kosar's question? Okay. Yes, I want to say I'm going to disagree a little bit with Meryem here, because I do think that we need both. We need both legal change as well as international human rights documents, as well as the attitudinal social changes. I don't think you need to say that we need to prioritize one versus the other.
I didn't say we don't need. I said that we have enough position, so we don't we don't have more. We don't need more. Of course, we need legal codes.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So I just meant like,
but the problem is not on paper. The problem is not on paper.
So I would actually say that, so yeah, I'm just drawing based on research that particularly when it comes to gender justice, gender equality type of research, it does show that when you change things at the legal level, it does help change attitudes as well at the societal level. So I think that's also important for us to keep in mind. So I think Kosar's question was specifically about gender quotas. Yes, I mean, I think we need to definitely make sure we know that there's not just one solution that can just address all of this. We need to go at it with like multi multi-policy, tools to be able to address this. So legal change, quota adoption, for instance, having mechanisms like that, they can be extremely helpful, but they're not the end of it all, right? You need to also be able to do education. I mean, I think Meryem just mentioned that, women are now outnumber men in Turkish universities. That is amazing. That is really big. That in itself is going to help trickle down sort of some of these societies. The other point that was mentioned that I really just wanted to maybe highlight, because I think it could be used as a way for us to see what's going on with terms of the conservative gender ideology that I was talking about earlier, is that Meryem mentioned that the Istanbul Convention was being used as a scapegoat, particularly in some of the districts, in some of the areas that were saying that, have you left the Istanbul Convention yet? But that's super interesting to me that some members of the society feel that this is the convention that one needs to exit, although it's the same party that in its earlier days was the signatory to it, hence it being called the Istanbul Convention. To me, that shows how the conservative side, meaning like the religious conservative, the fundamentalist side, I'm talking about like the really, those who were very much advocating leaving, they were also very much politically active in order to get their own ideals and their own sort of mechanisms and values onto the political party system. And then that in itself then led to, that's what I meant, that like women's causes were being sacrificed in order to appeal to a more conservative sections of the society, because I think the party was feeling threatened. Am I going to lose this particular side of vote? I know all that there is with regards to the domestic violence being such a major concern within Turkey. And I think yet having another tool like the Istanbul Convention would have been great. Having really strong policies against domestic violence is really, really important. They have to be implemented. Having attitudinal change, education at the social level, community level, those are all. So I think we need to really recognize that we need to go at this at like multiple fronts versus just thinking that one law or one policy will change it, or that, distinguishing between the international and the local mechanisms as well, because we need them all. Here in US, we need them all.
Yeah, totally agree. Thank you so much, Professor Munar. We have 2 more questions, but I'm afraid we have only 3 minutes left. So we will go on with Assos, then we will go with Rosie. Assos, you can go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for interesting topic for the researchers. I'm easily from what's easily this or what's happening in Turkey to Kurdistan region. So my question is that, don't you think that the political parties take advantage of that, using the women, the raising of the contribution of women in political life, and use it as a proof that we are modern, we are Democrats? That's what I see in Turkey. When I'm looking in Turkey, the political point of view is different from bringing women in political lives and give them rights, especially when we see the parliament member. We most of the time notice that they choosing the women that they are easy to lead or they are easy to control, instead of women having their own voices and they are strong, because that's what's happening in Kurdistan region. So my question is, don't you think they take advantage of women and using us as a shield against the Western society, that we are Democrats, we have a modern ideas? So don't you think that? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Assos, for your question. But I think the question is for which of the 2 speakers?
Anyone can answer. It's okay.
Why don't we take Rosie's question as well, and then we can answer, the 3 of us can do our concluding whatevers, yeah?
That will be perfect. Rosie, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you so much for these beautiful and powerful ladies, for these useful conversations. So based on, I'm studying the politics and international relations, as well as I really try to understand the women's roles in politics. However, my first question is for Mrs. Fatma. So in her speech, I noticed something. She emphasized on the unity and coexistence between the women, whatever it's a feminist and conservatives. So my question is, in what extent, Ms. Fatma, do you believe that this coexistence will lead the women to reach the higher goal, for instance, gaining the more authority in politics, especially in Turkey? And my second question is for the Mrs. Meryem. So Mrs. Meryem in her speech specifically mentioned that during the Justice and Development Party, the educations improved. However, do you believe that only improving the educations for women will help them or reflects on their political participations? I mean, there are so many educated women, for instance, in the southern Kurdistan, but many of them, they don't really believe even in the political participations in Kurdistan. However, my question is, do you really believe that just fixing the educations will improve women to participate in political? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, then we're going, no questions remain, so we will go to the answer of the questions of ASOS.
So I can very quickly just answer and then have the other two answer Rosie's question. So with regards to are women being used as a tool, and I think there is a lot of research and literature, like I think Yeşim Arat is also one who has talked about instrumentalization of women by political parties. I would say I would actually push back against that to some extent, because so I'm a person of nuance. I like to complicate things, and because things are just really complicated. It's not as simple to say yes or no. I think the women in the parliament are never monolith. Even women from within a political party are never a monolith. And I have come, when I did my interviews, whether it was women serving the parliament, women candidates, women within Kadın Kolları, you always found the really outspoken, who I call critical actors in my research, and as well as you found those who toe the party line, right? Who actually, act much worse on women's rights than some of the men in the party. So I think it's important to recognize that. But then at the same time, when you have the institution of political parties and they are very much male dominated, it is true that women just have a harder time being able to express themselves, not to mention even pursuing gender egalitarian policies. And I think this is where feminist scholarship is specifically going towards, can we restructure things? Can we reimagine how things, and I think this is what Fatma was talking about, in the sense of, like the pro-Kurdish parties have been able to say, hey, let's just talk about co-leadership all throughout. Let's get rid of the old patriarchal systems and put in our new ones. This is a really strong idealistic approach to it. It's very difficult to see it in practice. As I said, unfortunately, even the quotas, the very progressive quotas that the pro-Kurdish parties have put, they have not been able to achieve them themselves. But it's a process, it's a learning process. And I think that's why I mentioned that we just need to go at it from multiple directions: the social level, the political level, the legal level, the international level, the local community level, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fatma or Meryem, any of one of you can go ahead.
Yes. Very shortly for Asos question. Sometimes women like to be iron ladies. Sometimes they like to be flowers. Doesn't matter. Okay, I understand there are some risks about, low profile women, like only listeners, they just become profiles. But I also support numbers like Mona. Numbers are numbers. So when you make visible women, there is the power of the visible, as Foucault says, So there is always in power of the invisible. So first make visible women. So it's something. It's not everything, but it's something. So I believe that the visibility of women, regardless of their stance, is important. And secondly, of course, education is not everything, but also education is very, very important thing. The Turkish Republican era started with free education for everyone, for both women and men. And also now we have 4+4+4, 12 years compulsory education for everyone, which is provided by the state, and it's free. And also we have very much universities, like 183 universities in Turkey, which is very much criticized because of their low quality, but I still find it very important because education is very important. Education is an opportunity. education is saying something that you can go for yourself. If you don't have the certificate, then you don't have the certificate. You can go and find a job. You can go pursue for education. You can explain yourself. And if you miss that in 1820, the years of 1820, then you cannot do something. But if you have a graduate education, undergraduate education, then you can pursue master's and PhD in later years. So it's very important. It's like 70–80% for me, because you have to, as a state, bring this opportunity to women regardless of what they are. So that's contribution is very high. Of course, it's not everything, but it's it's something without doctrination of that. So when you provide education to someone, then you also provide themselves some choices, books, understanding, thinking, freedom, and you cannot, you can provide education, and sometimes it's like brainwashing. You cannot control everything. If you just you're reading and writing, it's a great opportunity for women to continue and to find a way to itself. So I find it very important for state providing free and education for all, especially for lower classes, disadvantaged women.
Thank you. So let me just answer, although, you know, Meryem and Mona did a good job already. What's I think important to realize, how do we then, you know, go forward? I totally agree with Asos Namak in the sense that, yes, women are showcased, as we say, you know, rather than included in the system structurally. That's why I say the infrastructure is important. You know, so that there is a chance for them to rise in the system, not because they know the president or they know people, males higher up, but rather by acquiring experience, professional experience, and therefore rise on their own merits rather than on who they know and loyalty. That is the major shift that needs to occur, so that people are appointed to positions regardless of gender on their merits alone. If we can make that switch, that will be significant. In education in this context is very important, because it is through education and culture, popular culture or the media, that you're able to reproduce your political system from, you know, one generation to another. So because of that, we need to focus on not only education, but political sphere, political representation, and all these different activities that women engage in society at large. What's important here is that most of the problems we have are problems that have been created from the top down, through patriarchy, through nationalism, through the intersection, unfortunately, of ethnicity, nationalism, patriarchy, and religion around gender. So those intersectionalities are what is sort of hard to overcome, because through those intersectionalities, women become marginalized, regardless of whether they're Kurdish women, Turkish women, secular Turkish women, or religious Turkish women. So what do we do going forward? What we have to do is study on the one side, as for example Mona and Meryem are doing, about the actual political representation or lack thereof of women in the public sphere in Turkey. But at the same time, we have to focus to figure out what's happening on the ground, as Meryem said, on the experiences of women on the ground. So we have to move from knowledge production that occurs in the public sphere to meaning production that occurs through our experiences in the private and public spheres. So that is what I would focus on we need to get women's realities on the ground, as Meryem said, by looking at their meaning production and how that is similar and different across these ethnic and religious conservative divides. That may be the way to go forward. And in this context, Zeynep Sarı Aslan has just come up with a book that I reviewed, and Kübra Sarı Aslan, Housewives in Southern Turkey, where she is trying to figure out how nonprofits from Europe plus sort of AKP policies interact to sort of train or provide training to housewives in Southeast Anatolia. And that demonstrates all these different dynamics. We need more more studies of that kind to figure out how we can go beyond these divides. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for insightful remarks. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to share this. Thank you all for your insightful contributions and engaging questions and thoughtful discussion. We spend 15 more minutes than the time that we were supposed to spend, but it really worth it, and the conversation was amazing. And I'm also pleased to share with you that this webinar will be published also on Sbey Research official platforms, and we will be sending out the goal of a blog post summarizing the key takeaways of the webinar, and a helpful thanks to our brilliant speakers like ladies. You nailed it, and for making time from different time zones, from UK, from Turkey, from US, and to different countries, and to our global audience for joining us, and to the driving forces behind this event. Dr. Robert Tal'at, Director of Sbey Research Center, and Dr. Kardo Rashid, Head of the Turkish Studies Unit, and Renas Karim, the Program Coordinator of Sbey Research Center. Your dedication and support made this this conversation possible. And thank you once again, and goodbye until the next time. I really enjoyed the discussion, and thank you so much for you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for organizing, and I really enjoyed the conversation as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a very good day. Bye.
Thank you.